It's two very exploratory and interesting experiences from our colleagues, Sharon Wohl and Jenny Partanen. Sharon is a professor at Iowa State University and also researching at TU Delft. And I'm going to give her the floor so she can add some more words if she wants before she starts her presentation. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
I'll put on my timer. So, I've been very fortunate in that I have a class that I'm teaching at Iowa State University that is based on my research in complex adaptive systems and urbanism and architecture. And so throughout the course of the semester, I teach students about the dynamics of complex adaptive systems, and then as my final project, I ask them to do research where they look at an urban problem and try to consider solving that urban problem using complexity dynamics. So the posters that are up in the hallway are that final project, which has been done as a research exercise. And there are a range of project titles, and then there are a range of students. I won't read out every title and every student because you can see them, but I am indebted to my students' work in terms of how it's helping me advance my own research, because of course if we're thinking about complexity, it's better to have a variety of experiments, and some of them have failed. I mean, some of them are not as great as others. None of them failed the project, but in terms of success in looking at complexity dynamics, there is a range within the posters that you'll see. One thing that you can do is the students have all uploaded poster pitches online, and so please look for the URL or the code. 2 of them don't have an online presentation, but the other 8 do. So there's a couple of, I guess I can look over here. There are a couple of general project themes, I guess, that I'll just discuss to give an overview. First of all, establishing real estate development priorities is the poster, which is air habitat. Determining how to invest in urban programming to support urban functional amenities. So how do you figure out what the best way to program an open site? There's 2 of these that do that, tactical prep projects and crowdsourcing district functions. There are 2 others that look at transport infrastructure and how transport infrastructure might be conceived using CAS. Those are UBus and Urban Lemma. There are 2 that look at park infrastructure and try to determine the right scale and kind of park infrastructure. There is one that actually looks at evaluating building programming that deals with creating a new flexible school and tries to imagine how would we be able to partition the kinds of classroom qualities that would be important. And there is one that engages with nimble planning codes that are responsive, parametric, and evolve over time. That one is a little bit of an outlier. I won't talk about that particular one that much in this presentation. And another one that was very speculative, that was interested in, would there be a way to have intentional disruptions in urban systems in order to shock ill-suited urban infrastructures into new kinds of regimes. And so that's productive perturbations, which I think we had a bit of a discussion about systems that have locked in ineffective ways. Okay, so common principles in all of the projects deal with looking at what are the agents in the systems, what is the resource within the system, and what are the links within the system, and links pertaining to information flows or energy flows between agents. And this follows from John Holland's discussion about the nature of self-organizing systems. He identifies agents, resources, and links. And then that combined with the dynamics of minimizing processes, where in complex systems, agents within a system are in fact looking for the path of least resistance. And so that is going to take the least work to get to a goal. So if we imagine ants that are looking for food, the ants are trying to find the food source that yields the maximum amount of food for the minimum amount of sort of travel distance to get there. And so you sort of wind up having these emerging pathways that combine this sort of, that are looking to maximize productivity. And then we get emergent fitness when we have these things all working together, is that there are ways in which the system can discover an emergent fit regime, and sometimes multiple emergent fit regimes where we have multiple niches that are partitioned. So these are the principles that I spend the first part of the semester discussing with the students, looking at different kinds of complexity dynamics. I'm very focused on considering what the nature is of the agents within the system and how agents can have the capacity to seek fitness. So in general, agents were considered to be smart urban elements that are endowed with the capacity to be mobile or to mutate. And that issue of smartness was considered differently, but often they have sensors or they are tied in with apps or something that allows them to have the capacity to both receive, deploy information, but also something about the nature of how the urban systems are designed that allows them to be mobile or to mutate. Then there's an issue of what is the resource that that urban infrastructure is seeking. So if you're a bridge in your complex system, what are you looking to gain as a resource? And arguably you could say a bridge is looking to be walked upon or traveled upon. So how is that a resource, and then how do you calibrate and measure that resource in terms of steering information? And then the nature of the links that steer agent behavior. So if we are going to think about urban features as agents, then how do these agents talk to one another, and what does it mean for agents to talk? In complex systems, you have ants that deploy pheromone signals, and that leaves a trace, and that allows a kind of communication. So what could we mean by communication? Okay. In almost all cases, students attempt to position class dynamics within physical entities in space, entities that learn and adapt in real time. And this is just interesting because I think this is one of the ways in which my work is, the thing I've really been exploring in my work in the last number of years is not so much computer modeling or dealing with communicative processes whereby agents in terms of different participants discuss how urban dynamics could unfold. And then arrive at deliberative consensus, and then you deploy that on the ground. But actually trying to think about, are there ways in which you could have processes on the ground that are themselves complex and adaptive? And then you're not looking to have the agents forecasting what they imagine a scenario to be, but you're actually enacting a scenario in real time, in situ. Okay, so these are the general themes that you'll see in the posters. They're often you'll see the same kind of words cropping up in different posters. Obviously, that has to do with how I've relayed the course material. But urban functions are disaggregated, so they're transformed into partitioned elements that can behave as independent agents. There are multiple parallel agents that act as exploratory probes that can investigate diverse outcomes. And agents are equipped with some kind of inherent adaptability or performative plasticity or mutability. And that could be that they can take on different kinds of functions, or that they can move to different sites, or that they can switch regimes. So for example, we talked about this semester, we've been talking about trash cans that could have sensors to tell when they're full, and maybe when they're full, or if they, depending on how quickly they get full or slowly, they might redeploy to another location, and the trash cans might signal to one another to say, I get full really quickly, so I need more help. Gather more trash cans here. But we also talked about, well, maybe then you could partition it down further and say some cans could hold recyclables, some could hold glass, some could hold, compost. And then how would you be able to figure out, how could they sort out the ratios of those niches by having some smart capacities? Themes as well in terms of signals and information steering. So often my students have been using apps to track information and send signals that steer behaviors. There's also this idea of using ratings, thumbs up or thumbs down, to help determine what kinds of behaviors are being approved by the public. So, for example, if we're going to test tactical interventions, how could we then crowdsource through thumbs up, thumbs down, whether a tactical intervention is regarded as being successful or unsuccessful? And that this acts as a kind of a digital pheromone that helps steer agent behaviors. Then, also of concern is, well, are the signals meaningful? So if only a few people are saying thumbs up, thumbs down, then is that really steering the system? And how can we ensure that we have enough participants that we're going to get a really strong crowdsourcing environment? The next point is a need to avoid signal distortion. So there's different kinds of leaving signals, and it's talked about as stigmergy, the marking of action or behavior, and pheromones are a stigmergic signal. But there are signals that are left with intention, whereby you have to leave a rating, and then maybe you skew the signal because only young people who use apps leave ratings. But if you have signals that are actually left simply by an environment being activated, so for example, when someone walks across grass in a park, they're leaving a trail, and that becomes a stigmergic signal. That requires no additional cognitive action other than performing the act. And so are there ways in which we can ensure that the acts are very clear and distortion-free? And then another aspect was tying the agents to different parameters. So if the physical environment is conceived as having a lot of different capacities, then maybe there are different niches, different latent resources. And how do we discover niches? And we looked at parameter bars as being a way in which you could signal, okay, well, this parameter is important to a certain percentage of agents in the system, but to others not so. I'm going to go a little bit more quickly. So the final theme, of course, is emergence, and how by putting these dynamics together, we get a kind of performance or enactment of different more fit regimes. And different kinds of basins of attraction are activated. We see as patterns stabilized, contingent, emergent, fit, and stabilized structures. There are a number of challenges that I've noticed in the project. One is correctly identifying what the agent is. What is the agent within the system? And there's actually surprising ambiguity that I can discuss with you. The other is just determining what is the actual resource within the system that you're trying to maximize in some way. There's some ambiguities around that. And then how do we create links and information modes and different kinds of signaling and how those are disambiguated. So these are things which we're sort of working through right now that we still need a little bit more clarity on. But this, the fundamentals, which I think can be used in a lot of different systems, is the notion of partitioning a problem into discrete agents, enabling the agents to employ different strategies to solve the problem, allowing the agents to convey signals and making sure that those signals have fidelity within them, giving the agents some kind of capacity to adjust in accordance with feedback. And, well, I think you can read most of the list. The last one is to occasionally shock the system to avoid it getting stuck in the wrong place over a long period of time. So just a quick sample. This is one of, I would say, one of the, yeah, it got the highest grade. This is to me, one of the most interesting ones, where we have the notion of a bridge and saying, could we disaggregate the notion of a bridge and turn it into a series of discrete floating platforms that are tied to each act as independent agents, being steered both by users and also by themselves in a way, because they can monitor whether they're being walked on. So if they want food for themselves, the food is I've been walked upon. And if too long a period goes on where they're not walked upon, then they can redeploy and move elsewhere. And also they can be steered by people who say, I would like a bridge to be here. And the more people say, I would like a bridge here, the more likelihood there will be that a bridge will start to aggregate in a particular environment. So they're magnetized, and there were some technical details around the design, but the idea was, could they be deployed so that they arrive and create a fit urban configuration over the course of time? But of course, then they would disaggregate if, after a period of time, they're not walked upon. So that was one of the samples, and we can see in here that there's two things that are co-evolving. We have both foot traffic patterns that are evolving, as well as the bridge structure is evolving. And those two things are actually acting in a co-evolutionary manner. So I have been thinking about how we have a design idea with different agents, and we also have fitness criteria. So is the bridge being walked upon? I only have a minute, so I can't go into this in great detail, but this is sort of a general framework I've been thinking about for how you need both agents and fitness criteria, and that those two things co-evolve simultaneously and can both be crowdsourced. Both of these are actually emerging, the fitness criteria and the design ideas. That's something that I've been working on in a website that I've been developing where students have been crowdsourcing the diagrams, and those are acting as emergent agents. So this is another example, the U-bus system, where effective bus transport system evolves over the course of time by this co-evolving users moving towards bus stops, buses moving towards the users, and the system gradually settling into a fit regime from all possible configurations of bus routes. And I have no time left, so here we go. That's it. 0 minutes. Questions?
Thank you.
Questions? Question. Christina.
Yeah.
Christina, you want to discuss it?
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very nice also to read your paper. I realized I felt really nostalgic. It reminded me a lot of my own student project. So I also, it was kind of nice to see that the seats were there already, even though we did not frame it in the same terms. I found it really interesting that you're actually dealing with physical elements. I thought it's kind of super interesting. I was wondering if in any other of the semesters or in general you discussed also the idea of like negative resources. So when you have a function or an element that is not looking to somehow positively optimize its position or its resources, but something that would actually should be away from everybody else. So it's easy to say that people would like to have more parks or to have access to bus stops, but what if you would have like a garbage burning factory that everybody wants to be away from? Do you think that in this case the dynamics would play out in the same way? And what would be the role of resources in terms of like space being limited? So how far could it get from everyone in a certain sense? So have you explored this kind of reverse?
Probably not. I mean, what you're discussing is interesting. We have talked about the fact that positive feedback does not necessarily make something good. So we've talked about the example of graffiti in a neighborhood, and that you want to actually avoid reinforcing feedback. And so, what are systems that you can use to disrupt, to limit that signal is something that continues to steer the system. And we have also talked about the fact that you still need human agents here to decide what do we determine as fit, because the students are looking at algorithms, and I should clarify that the students haven't written the code for any of these, right? These are thought experiments that if I then got together with someone who could design an app, these would be the lines of code that we would need to have and what the code would need to do. But I've only had one student who's actually done a project where they've written code. But sort of in terms of your question, I think that we have said that if you are going to be thinking about writing that code, you have to think, what is the resource that's actually steering the thing? And so conceptually, I think you're right, that you could be sort of saying, what is the resource that you want to be moving away from, or what is the trajectory that you want to be moving away from? Probably the closest to wanting to steer away from something is the one student who said, could we meaningfully talk about productive disruptions and moving away from a lock-in condition, and so shocking the system. But I think that's a little bit different from actually an ongoing avoidance of a particular resource. It would be interesting to think about. This is the second year that I've done the posters. My students from this year are just starting, so it might come up in our discussions.
Sharon, would you consider these new systems that your students have like invented as a new actor? Like you get tenants in a building, and all of a sudden you have a janitor taking over certain jobs. It's another actor. How would that change your initial map of who the actors are when you consider the final system as being a new actor in the game?
Yeah, so we have talked about that in terms of complex systems that are operating at different fractal scales, and so every system is a component of something else. We typically have not sort of said, okay, what's the next scale up? Because I think they're challenged enough at getting their head around designing one system and identifying what the relevant agents are. But certainly conceptually, we have talked about the fact of these nested hierarchies. And so then, but I think your question is interesting because then at that next level up within the hierarchy, how does that next level of actor, how can that be steered or deployed in some way? And that's a great question when we're dealing with, particularly with physical entities, that the physical outcome then has to have these other global properties that may need to be steered.
Thank you. Fahad?
Yeah, I really love the way how you take your students along in your own journey. I think it's very cleverly designed, also this education program. What I was wondering is that it seems that the applications that the students have designed, although they're still conceptual, are a way to avoid these strong lock-ins. And at the same time, I was also wondering what kind of mechanisms are there to avoid that their ideas eventually also result in lock-ins. So if you look at the bridge, for example, that is established, okay, a dominant pattern is emerging, but then how did they thought it would stay alive and adapting over time? And the same with the bus routes, for example.
Right.
Could you say a bit about that?
Yeah, they talked about it actually. So in the self-organizing bus route, they said every semester they would sort of shock the system in order to avoid, so they would kind of disrupt the bus routes and let things kind of start a little bit anew, with keeping only a few fragments of existing routes, so that if they said, well, there's going to be a new student body every semester, so we don't want that to kind of be too stuck in the old regime, so we'll let the system stabilize, but then we'll basically start cycle repeats every semester. So there was some consideration of that. It's interesting when you say how I've been steering my students' work, because I've also been feeling like they've been steering my own work evolving. And certainly they are way more interested in apps. So I have been looking at urban form and how urban form could evolve and how signals could be embodied within the design of the physicality of the thing, probably because I'm coming from the background as an architect, so it's like, well, how can the physical building contain a signal? They're like, well, don't worry about that, just make an app for it. So it's really interesting how their work has taken me along this ride. And also, I feel they are not locked in, and I had a slide about that, in terms of thinking about what does it mean to, I guess maybe it's later, what does it mean to be a bridge? So, you know, I as a designer am locked in with what a bridge means, but you get some 22-year-old creative architecture students and they're like, well, of course the bridge can be a moving platform, you know? So the things that seem like really difficult infrastructures to partition, I feel their creativity helps sort of fuel other ways of thinking about things, which has been really helpful.
Thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, my question was that are these all architectural, like these design students, or do you have any planners?
Yeah, so it's the College of Design has 7 different departments within it at Iowa State. So I have a combination of architecture students, people in landscape architecture, people in planning. I had an interior design student at the start of the semester. So variety, yeah, it's open. Yeah, so it's really nice to get the different perspectives.
Because that's really important when they go to work someplace, you know, to get better understanding of things. And I was thinking that I'm having a little bit of similar course at home, teaching the kind of regional planning, strategic planning to architectural students who are going to be planners too someday, maybe. And we're kind of like doing some GIS analysis, then move to the strategies in the regional scale, and then zooming in a little bit like what you're doing here. And but now my next step would be to kind of like introduce that kind of like complexity planning tools,
right,
or design tools.
Right.
So we definitely have to discuss.
We have to talk more. Yeah. You're going to come visit Iowa State, I think. Yeah.
Any more comments, questions? Sharon?
Just interested with regards to, do you see any of the projects having commercial potential at all? And if so, would the university be willing to come on board and help students take it the next step?
So this is, I am so not the right person for that step. Yes, absolutely. And the thing that was interesting is 6 months after Chinyang did the floating platforms, I'm in Europe and I'm looking at this project being organized through the Amsterdam Metropolitan Solutions. And I'm like, this is Chinyang's project. And there it is, it's being done. And then I was looking at something else, and Paolo's project on air habitat. There's a group in Amsterdam that's also crowdsourcing real estate opportunities. So I think, yes, absolutely, there are tons of commercial opportunities. Some of my students are more entrepreneurial. I'm not. I'm so happy to just have the ideas out there and support them. But at the moment, my focus isn't on how these could be turned into actual projects.
I'm sure your university would be though.
Yeah, it's something
Might be
for me to
contracting
think about,
side.
right. But I just love doing the research on it. If anyone else wants to help, share the social entrepreneur.
I just have a brief comment. It was, I loved your presentation. It was really interesting to see how this can be transmitted to students. Although there can be like two different ways to approaching it. One is to put students trying to grasp complex adaptive systems in a city, or another one is to generate this complex adaptive system, which was the second one, right? So I think there's lots of potential in this kind of experiments. It was just this comment. I don't know if you thought of the effort to explore the first one, to put the students like identifying situations that can be complex and adaptive, that are already.
Right. We definitely talk about a lot of examples in class, and they do a paper as well. But in terms of this project, it's like, okay, as a designer now, how would you design? And what is the role of a designer? Because if everything is emergent, then you can sort of say, oh, well, everything's emergent. I can't do anything, right? And so the question is, do we still have design tools that are based on emergence? And as designers, how do they deploy these tools? And I really encourage you, as I said, if you have any feedback for the students and watch their poster pitches, they would love to get comments back, so you can post comments on the YouTube.
That's
Can you
good.
tell a little bit about how you help the students in making that transition from the theory of complex system into a design? Do you,
Right.
like, for instance, the concept of stigmergy, is that something that you actually give to them as, like what you said, a design tool, or do you have a different method of?
Yeah, so the first half the course is probably just introducing them to concepts of complexity theory, and then their midterm project, which is a group project, they design, most of them design a game. And so the game is a game that has to have something that emerges within the game. And so you have pieces in the game and you have rules, and but they have to be tying it to, like, it could be the self-organizing trash can game. And what would be, how would you weight trajectory? So, because there's a lot of things in games that operate as complex systems. You have dice that can be weighted, or various things. So we've sort of tried to introduce, when do you want randomness in the system? Do you have a spinner that creates randomness? Like, what do you do in the game? And that, I think, as a team, helps them talk through a lot of issues, and then it becomes also clearer where they don't understand what's happening within the system. So the floating bridge system was a development from a midterm project, and that was actually the design of an app for the bus, for the self-organizing bus system, which was then extrapolated to be the floating bridge system as an independent project. So it's, this course is still new, it's still evolving, but the game definitely helps.
Okay. Thank you very much. We can continue during the coffee break, as we can see the posters that are outside. Thank you very much. Now I will invite Jenny Partanen from the Tampere University, Finland.
University of Technology.